Twister.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Vinh and Ali show. Today we are going to dissect and pull apart the book Sapiens by Ali. How do I say this guy's name?
We're going to have our best attempt. It's Yuval Noah Harari is my shot.
I think you said it. I think you said it perfectly. So well done.
Thank you.
This book, there are not many books that I've read that made me feel like everything I knew about the world was wrong. That, history, going back to prehistory, just everything I was taught was wrong, or everything that I thought of the world was wrong, and that society hangs together on structures and stories that are just made up. Like I don't know. It was kind of scary reading this book as well. And another way I'll shape it just quickly as well is I felt like when I was reading this book, I was getting to know my great grandparents. So that was a nice kind of warm feeling because learning about our race. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
You would feel more closely connected to them because you're very hairy.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm only a few generations away. You've maybe got one or two additional.
Dude, I'm hairless. So I am very far evolved from that.
Yeah. You wouldn't survive well in a desert, I don't think. But that's right.
but I love the whole fear we felt before we did this podcast because you messaged me a few days ago going, "Are you sure we should do this, man?" Like,
yeah, are we smart enough to really talk about this book? I'm not sure.
There is a fear. I really do feel that because there's definitely lessons to take away from this book, but it just requires such a I don't know if we have that level of intellect.
Well, even if we don't, we're going to fake it. We're going to attempt our best.
Well, we're going to try.
Effort.
We're going to try.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and just a bit of high-level context for this book for those that maybe haven't read it. I personally think it's one of the best descriptions of who we are as a species.
Hell yeah.
Than anything else that I've read. I remember reading this book the first time, maybe it was like 2017. So this is the second reading on this, and I had to look at some of my notes from that reading, and just my big reflection was how much it's helped shaped and just changed some of those beliefs that I had 4 or 5 years ago compared to even now. Yeah, that was one of the big things from this book, just because it just dissects who we are in such a compelling way. Right? Like,
do you have an example? Do you have an example of how this book has shaped you since you've read it?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest things, even when I was reading it this second time, and we'll dig deeper into this, but just the power of mythology and storytelling, and just the thread throughout history, like how everything's so connected, and that you can't look at anything from a black and white perspective. The fact that we live in Australia and what fundamentally underpins how we live and the lives that we're living at the moment are shaped by so much history over the last 100 years, 400 years, 10,000 years, and it's all kind of interrelated and linked. And just the concept behind the systems that govern our world today, whether it's political systems, social systems, and how they're really interconnected too. Like, I remember when I was reading that, and we'll dig into examples, but actually, screw it. Let's just dig into one now. But I love the concept of just how capitalism, for example, is such a big part of our world, but that's ultimately a belief system. Like that concept of whether if we're buying an Apple phone or a Mercedes car, that's really a story that we're buying into, rather than a real entity. And I don't know, there's just so much in this book that stands out. What about you?
No, definitely. Look, I mean, that was one of the things that blew my mind the most.
Let's jump into it.
Well, look at this, right? Because this is what I thought about. And I want to hear an example from your life as well, right? Of how it changed you, because I think that's fascinating to hear that. But it's like the whole idea behind Mercedes being a story, or the example that the author used was Peugeot, right? And what blew my mind before that was when he said that when we look at the stories that shamans used to tell, or the ancient Romans or Greeks used to tell of stories about Thor and all of this, and we look at that and we kind of go, "Oh, that's a little bit silly, isn't it? That's a bit childish. People living in an alternate universe, and However, when we look at the stories we tell ourselves today, the concept of a company is a story as well.
Mm.
I remember when I was sitting down with my accountant, this was very early on in my entrepreneurial journey. The accountant would say to me, Vin, I want you to imagine that the company you're building is a separate entity that's sitting in that chair over there. So it's a real thing, you know, and every decision you make has to benefit that entity. It's like another person at the table. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. But when I read this book, it kind of connected that story that I remembered from back then, going, but that entity that I created, PTY Ltd or LLC, that's like Thor.
Yeah.
The only reason that it is valuable for us to believe in that is because the majority of us believe in it.
Mm.
The only reason why Thor was so valuable to the ancient civilizations is that because the majority of people believed it was real. Because, and the connection that the author made when he said that, you know, instead of witches and shamans doing dances, is lawyers going through rituals of writing paperwork that creates this entity. So to me, that took a pillar out from underneath me of what I thought the world was. You know, I thought, oh, of course the company is real. It's real because it is real, but it's not.
Mm.
What the hell?
Yeah. I can't remember which book it was. And I remember reading this line saying that when people use the sentence, the company will be impacted or the country will be impacted, it's nearly a false sentence because the company doesn't actually have feelings. Like, yes, the employees will, or the people within it might be impacted, but you can't actually impact a company, yet they are. I don't know how to describe it, but it's like this weird thing, right? Like, it's a real thing, but it's also fully imaginary. Which is mind-blowing. And they use that Peugeot example where Peugeot just started as the idea of its, say, founder, and then it just grew into this thing that everyone believes in, that spans all over the world. There's thousands of employees in different countries. Now, if the founder of Peugeot is long gone, but the company still lives on just through that belief system. And I think that's quite interesting, right?
And how did that impact your life many years ago since you read it? So in you kind of discovering that and realizing that, how did that change the way you lived?
I think it was more around... all right, let me try to collect the thoughts here around how it had an impact. I think this book had a pretty big impact because, first of all, it made me just realize, how little I knew about the world. I think would have been one of the things. But then also just the interconnectedness of everything. I spoke a little bit about that earlier on as well. But it was more around the fact that when we think that we've got control over something, we actually don't have too much control. We're just playing a part in whatever game or ecosystem that we're operating within. And at the end of the day, we're still quite animalistic in the way that we go about things. So there was probably a few different components there where it just made me look at things like, all right, well, it's not that binary in terms of, say, me starting an idea or a venture, say, for example, in business. A lot of it's just got to do with timing, luck, where I'm based at the moment, some of the actions that I take. But at the end of the day, there's so many other factors that play a role in that are really interconnected to, everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, I was reflecting on that when you were saying that as well, in that, I mean, this specific thing we just spoke about in terms of how everything is just a story. And we believe in these stories, therefore these stories are real, and therefore these stories provide value to all of us because most of us believe in it.
Yeah.
When I read that, and I kind of, I've only recently read this book for the first time. So to me, it just made me think, what stories am I currently believing in?
Yeah.
And are these stories useful to me? Do they serve me? There's that, and I'll connect this with another point in the book, where the book says that based on science, nothing in the world is unnatural. You know how we have this idea that there's things that are natural and there's things that are unnatural. Whereas when the author was talking about it, he was saying that like in science, if it can happen, it's natural. What kind of sparked that whole idea of something being unnatural was the world of religion and culture. Culture says this is unnatural for this to happen, or sometimes religions say, forbids potentially the same-sex marriage. That's unnatural. But in science, it's no. If it can happen, it is natural. And then that just made me think, wow. So again, we believe in stories that aren't real, but if enough of us believe it, then it's real. And then also, there's nothing unnatural. Everything is natural. It just made me think, well, that means anything goes. Mm. It truly does mean anything goes. It means that your life is like a blank canvas, and you truly can do whatever the hell it is that you want. It was a really empowering thought, because I thought about like Apple. You look at Steve Jobs. He was just someone who told a very compelling story and got the whole world to believe in his story. And now Apple is one of the biggest companies in the world. So that means that the skill of storytelling easily is the most powerful skill set ever. Yeah. I mean, you look at like the terrible tyrants of the past, of like Hitler, for example, was able to tell a story. And because a lot of people believed it at the time, he was able to control the masses. So it just, I don't know, I teach communication skills, and I never realized the significance of storytelling at this magnitude. I mean, I looked at storytelling as being an influential tool and skill to be able to have that allows us to influence and persuade others to do what we want them to do. I never knew that it was as powerful as this from a existential point of view, like it's crazy. I'm so shocked and blown away by it that that skill is a superpower.
I think you just hit one of the biggest points, and probably I was articulating it in circles a little bit, but it's amazing how the strongest stories are still in play. Like if you look at the major religions, for example, they're stories that have lasted 2,000 years plus, right? And they still influence. Like I think the most amazing thing that the author does is he showcases how these stories have a practical impact, whether it's forming nations, forming systems, like even call it capitalism, communism. So many things are the threads of these, call it core stories. And even when you look at Greek mythology and the stories that started with like the sun gods, and you look at Hinduism and their stories, and how you're right, storytelling, long-lasting, endearing storytelling is pretty much what shapes us. And I think that's one of the big things that stands out for sure.
The other reason as well is it talks about how when it comes to chimps, they can't form a group with more than 50 chimps. It just becomes is not manageable after that. Whereas for human beings, before storytelling, the group size was about 150. You can only control about 150 people at a time. Tribes didn't get bigger than that. To get tribes that are bigger than that, you need something more powerful. And that's when myths and religion and storytelling come in, because you look at what is a country. A country is just a group of people who have similar values and beliefs. And different countries have kind of different values and beliefs. And I actually experienced that in the US. When I went to different states in the US, different states had different values and beliefs. And it was fascinating. Like some people from Ohio or some people from Salt Lake or Utah, for example, they have pride with these certain sets of values. And they'll say, oh, I am from Idaho, or I am from New York, or I am from Boston. So it's funny how storytelling, like that is the basis of how we've developed countries and states and, sports teams, and even the whole fabric in which society is sewn together with, it's just insane that it all comes from that.
Yep. It's like what you speak about too, in the business sense, that you can have the best product or be technically amazing, but if you can't tell that story, it's not really going to matter too much, is it? It's the same thing when we look at the power of brands. And even one of the things, and I just made a little note about this when I was reading this book, like say you look at the United States, for example. As I was reading this book, one of the things that I connected to was just how powerful the United States has been in terms of storytelling over the last, call it 80, 90 years. And even the power of, say, Hollywood, where it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you've probably seen an American movie. And the power of that, like at scale, that the Americans have been able to share stories that align with their values, that showcase the places, their culture on such a global scale. I just have a feeling that that's had such a big part to play with how so many of us live our lives. It doesn't matter whether you're in Hong Kong, in Australia, whether you're in India. Like, if you've seen that, like Hollywood culture just drives so much off the way that we operate and act.
That's so true, and that's so fascinating. That's so fascinating, because that means that Hollywood has the power to shape civilization moving forward.
And that was one of the notes that I made. I'm like, governments, there's potentially a strategy there that if you invest in creating movies and stories, it could lead to political power.
Well, here's an interesting one, right? I mean, before Obama being the first African-American president, right, was like a feat of its own. But then what's really interesting is if you look at movies before Obama became president, they generally had an African-American president. There were often at times you'd see an African-American president. And I wonder if that then also played a role. Surely it played a role in opening people's minds up to gradually accepting that.
Yep. Yeah, I think the narrative has to. It's even when you look at sci-fi, like how many things in sci-fi end up becoming partially real?
Yeah,
whether it was science fiction in the 60s. Like, I think what movies and stories do is that they allow the imagination to expand. Right. It's the same as reading, right? Like when we read this book, it creates new synapses and new thoughts and ideas. And the more that we're exposed to certain ideas and concepts, like I remember growing up in the 90s, so many of the movies were like the underdog sports movie, you know, Cool Runnings, the Mighty Ducks.
Yeah.
And I'm certain watching those movies growing up had an impact on the way that my values and what I really wanted to do and some of the experiences that I wanted were then related to. And that would be the same for nearly every generation. Like everyone that you speak to, they recall some movie that they watched that had an impact or some book that they read that had an impact. And generally they're stories, right? 2,000 years ago, there was maybe one story depending on where you lived. And that story was really hammered into you, forming the concept known as religion, right? Now we just have a greater variety. Like people believe in football teams, they believe in sports, they believe in brands, they believe in whatever it is. There's just a lot more diversity in the stories that people believe in that then form their values. And then we see that play out on social media, on Twitter. Whereas maybe say 100, 200 years ago, there was only, it's a bit like TV channels, right? Even 20 years ago, you had 4 TV channels that gave you all that information. Now you could probably look at, hundreds of different sources. But yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why the world is now so complex, because there are so many people telling so many different stories, which is causing more arguments. Whereas back then there's only maybe a handful of stories that, you know, weren't being shown on the screens, but rather just being told orally between different tribes. Because if there's only 4 religions or 10 religions to be able to subscribe to, then it's not going to be as chaotic if there's, you know, 300 stories, 3,000, a million stories you can believe in. Now there are people who believe in the flat earth. There are people who believe that space isn't real. There's all these crazy stories that people believe in. And that is causing more chaos than ever, because the story that I believe in doesn't match the story you're believing in. So therefore we can't be friends and we have to kind of argue online. And yeah, that's interesting.
Well, I think the one of the best examples of that is what we've seen play out in the US over the last 8 years.
Yeah.
Right? Like that storytelling and having such opposing storytelling types, whether it's the left versus Trump, for example, it just split it right down the middle nearly. It got the nation to a point where 50% of people literally believed one story that was so far opposing to what the other 50% believed. And then you lose middle ground a little bit. But again, just that power of using mediums, of creating a narrative, of telling a sticky story.
You know, talking about, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that was finished.
No, I mean, thinking about cinemas and how they project stories into our lives, you know, that kind of affects people at scale. Whereas when you look at it from the individual point of view, what kind of movies are you playing in your own head? Like, I think that's fascinating in that we are made up of a series of stories and we live out our lives based on the stories that we play in our heads. So if you grow up and the people around you keep telling you the story that, you know, you're not good enough, that you're inadequate, that you're ugly, that whatever, insert negative statement, then if you choose to keep replaying those stories, then you will live out that story. It's like, for example, for myself, as I kind of reflect now, when I was young, our family was poor and we didn't have a lot. And one of the reasons why I feel that I place still such a heavy amount of value on money is because at some deep level, I'm still running that you're poor movie, that you don't have enough movie. And that's kind of the story that I currently still subscribe to. Therefore, last year I still felt bad when I didn't work. I mean, I'm better now, but it's just, it's interesting to think about the stories that exist in your head right now and what you're unconsciously screening on a daily basis.
Yeah. And I think that's also the power when people talk about systemic, call it whether it's oppression or privilege or just systemic stories. And so many of those exist that we probably aren't even aware about. Like, I think that's another thing that this book really highlighted for me is that there's so many things that happen at the subconscious level based on history. Right, like just even mind-blowing things where he breaks down just the odd chance, like even when you look at the origins of, say, slavery, for example, where the slavery movement 300 years ago could have easily been European people. But based on things like climate and travel times, that's why a lot of the African nations were picked by those countries that wanted to get into the slave trade. Like, how nuts is that? That just one decision like that impacted such a big part of history. Or how, call it like the Europeans, like the book digs into how the Dutch, like a couple of companies, like the British East India Company, and then there was the Dutch company. Like they just a small group of people, or the Spanish explorers as well, like 500 people that took over all of Latin America. Just because they had a desire to conquer and conquest. Like, to me, that's just mind-blowing that these little moments in history and during our time had such a big impact that still has ripple effects now, depending on where you grow, just on the luck of where you were born or where you got to travel to or what system you got to enter. It's insane. Like the fact that, if you're born in a certain country, the odds of you living in poverty and starvation just because you were born there versus, call it being lucky and being born in, say, somewhere like Australia, for example, or Denmark, means that your base level chances of just living a different life are so much higher. That blows my mind.
Yeah, it really does. It's like these little sliding door moments in history. It could have gone one way or the other.
Yep. And that kind of goes back to my point of what I learnt from it is just the concept of chance and luck and timing. Even though we value action and intent and all those things, which are really important, but so much of it is,
helps you get rid of some of that ego, doesn't it? You know, you can kind of
really does this book.
It's less
it
about
makes you
me.
feel
It's
really
more
insignificant.
Yeah,
which
it
is
does.
nice in a way, and to show that you have control and you've got to own your own thing. But at the end of the day, we're all just a relatively small cog in a much larger machine. But then also as a small group, you can impact so much. So there's so many little, we always talk about it, like paradoxes, and it's not black and white. But yeah, like one person like Hitler can have such a big impact, but at the end of the day, he's just one person out of a few billion, and realistically he was on this earth for, what was it, 60, 70 years or however long he lived. I'm not even sure, my history isn't that great, but it just shows you that, there's fleeting moments, certain people with certain intent, certain stories that get told. I love this on the front page of the book. And it's just got the book summed up in such a simple way. And I'll read it out. It's got: fire gave us power. Gossip helped us cooperate. Agriculture made us hungry for more. Mythology maintained law and order. Money gave us something we can really trust. Contradictions created culture. Science made us deadly.
And that's the end of the podcast. Summary. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the episode.
What an amazing summary of everything that we are.
Far out. That's so good.
Right? You don't need to read the book.
It's funny because as you read this book, you understand more about yourself as you learn about the history of humankind.
Mm.
Another weird thing that when you just read that out as well, and that I was feeling while I was reading the book, was that it just made me feel very connected to other people.
Mm. Yeah.
And that we all fall for the same things.
Mm.
It's like the instinct to gorge on high calorie food, that's wired into our DNA. So when I overeat and eat yummy food, that's not just me doing it, it's the entire bloody world doing it. And it's like, it just makes me go, oh yeah, we all suffer from this. It's like that dude on Instagram that's ripped and that gal that's ripped, they still want to eat this stuff. They just, I don't know.
Better at hiding it.
Yeah, better at hiding it. Well, maybe, I don't know what they do, but like, it's just our innate desires are not, it's not, I'm the only one experiencing this sadness. I'm the only one suffering because I continually want more. It's like, no. This is wired into your DNA as a human.
Mm.
So it made me feel less like an idiot. It just made me feel like we're all idiots. That's great.
We're all connected. I think that's such a big lesson from this, is that we're all so connected. And also what it made me really conscious of is just, even just little things, right? Like for us to have a meal, that there is some cost somewhere, or that other people are playing such a pivotal role in that. Like when you look at the food chain and how, like, so many different, for us to have a cup of coffee, how many people have impacted that, and how connected it is, and how easy it is to lose sight of that.
Yeah.
Really, really similar to what you were saying. It's just, that everything is so connected, but yet we still kind of sometimes get isolated and feel that, it's just us and our family, or us and our friends. It makes you look at the world with a much larger perspective, I think.
Well, one thing that has changed is that we no longer live in large communities. We live in
just our family. That bit.
Oh, dude, I love that.
I was reading that bit. Yeah,
I love that. I mean, the whole reason why I bought the house that I live in right now is so that we can, multiple times during the week have family over and cook up a meal and eat together and have lots of noise happening, playing music in the background, kids running around. Like, there's nothing I love more than that.
Mm.
And I did that because I enjoyed it, but I didn't realize that is important for us as a human race. Like, that's not just good for me. It's good for everyone. We all need that. We all need a sense of community. And we've in a way lost that in a lot of Western civilizations, because that's what my parents did. When my parents grew up in Vietnam, the whole neighborhood comes together for meals. It's like there's a huge element of community involved when it comes to raising children, when it comes to, harvesting the crop in the area. There were communal farms, there were these areas where you grow things together and you harvest together and you share. Not everyone needs to have a well. My grandpa was the one that had the well, and he provided water for the entire community, right? There was a lot of that. Whereas I think the illusion of loneliness, it's not really an illusion. It's kind of, our culture has shaped that loneliness into the way we live now.
Yep. Yeah, the book speaks about that, right? It talks around how that reliance. We're now protected by our state, by our government. So we don't really need that reliance on the village. Whereas, say, I think it uses the example of, say, even 100, 200 years ago, that if you were a widow and you didn't have a partner, your odds of survival were actually pretty low. Whereas now, yeah, you can, in a lot of countries, kind of move on, survive through whether it's a safety net off just society, right? You don't need that immediate family probably as much as what we did 50, 60 years ago. But then I think that does also lead to isolation. Like even nowadays, they do a survey where they ask people how many of their neighbors do they know and how many people do you know on your street? And I think it's decreased something like tenfold over the last 20 or 30 years in most countries.
I can speak for myself. In my whole street, I know one of my neighbors. I don't know the people living on either side of me, but I know someone who lives across the road from me.
Yep.
It's bizarre, man. Okay, so think about this then. Think about our children and their children and their children's children. If you kind of extrapolate this and look at where we're headed towards, it's definitely heading towards people just living in a virtual reality world. And that's the ultimate form of isolation. Right now, we each have a little box that, oh, hold on. I'm getting a call right now. So I just have to cancel that. You couldn't hear it, could you? Could you hear that?
No.
Oh, that was ridiculously loud on my end.
Yeah.
But the thing is, right now, we all live in our little kind of cut out boxes where the council gives us the dimensions of our property and what parts of the land we own. And, you know, we don't even see our parents as often anymore as we used to, and let alone our neighbors and community. And soon, I think it'll get to that point where you're isolated, meaning you live in a simulation by yourself. That's scary, man.
And maybe that's already happening now. Because think about how we use our phones.
Yeah, that is happening now.
Like realistically, social media, video games, it's just probably not to, I don't know if anyone's read the book Ready Player One, to that level where you literally live your life in a virtual reality headset and in an alternate world. But you're right. Like, I think so much of the way that we live right now is escaping what you'd call conventional reality.
You know, one of the other things I read in the book that gave me a lot of, like, it made me feel good and bad at the same time. I mean, that was the theme of this book, was that you read it, you're like, wow, that's really interesting. Oh, that's really sad. Yeah. And then it's just a bloody roller coaster reading this book. Yeah. But one of the things that made me think about was that human beings are complex and we feel emotionally sometimes conflicted simply because we evolved so quickly. We evolved so rapidly. If you compare our evolution compared to any single other animal that's on Earth, we evolved so damn quickly that our brains didn't get a chance to catch up, because a lot of the times, many animals take thousands, millions of years to go through the slow process of natural selection to become the way they are. Right? It's why, like, you look at dogs or you look at birds. I think one of the reasons they seem so zen, well, it's because they've evolved at an extremely slow process. The natural selection process was very slow, whereas we went through that process so fast that our minds are, you know, we still have that reptilian brain, or whatever you want to call it, brain, where we still feel like every time we feel nervous, I'm being hunted by a saber-toothed tiger. So to me, the anxiety that we feel, or the panic, or all these mixed emotions, the reason for that is not just because you're you and you're an idiot or you're a loser. It's because of evolution.
It's true.
You know, and it was comforting. It was comforting that I'm not crazy. It's that a part of my race, we evolved so damn quickly that the wires are all bloody jumbled up at times.
Well, one of the things, just as you were telling that, it just made me realize that we're going so fast, and it maybe just highlights how amazing we are as a species, is that even now, you look at the things that are coming into fashion or that people are using as tools, like meditation, like so much around it is around nearly slowing down. slow, getting more into the present moment rather than just going so fast. Because I think collectively it feels like we're starting to feel that wow, we're going so quick here. And is it leading to fulfillment and happiness? And I think that speed component is really interesting. Like, what's the biggest thing you hear nowadays when you speak to someone? Oh, wow, he grew up really quick, or geez, this year's flown by. Like, so much of the narrative is around us struggling to keep up with time, or what our concept of time is.
I think the human ability to be introspective, and I mean, the very word Homo sapien means wise person, right? Like wise being, right? Do you remember that quote I sent you the other day on WhatsApp from John Danaher, who's a jiu-jitsu coach, where he goes, I teach beginners from the ground up and I teach experts backwards. It's like our mind is so complex and so jumbled, and it's so confusing as a human being, because when you're growing up, you're dealing with the fast nature of evolution that you just went through, and everything is so complex. But to enjoy life more, you have to distill it and make it simpler. Like, I love that quote, because I feel like that's what I'm going through right now. Is that one of the things I did because of you, and if people are listening to this podcast sequentially, and I don't know if anybody is, but if they are, in the last 3 episodes, you've convinced me to start journaling. Like, you've just said how amazing journaling was, and every time you say it, I just kind of stay quiet and go, yep, that's cool, man. And I finally started doing it, and I've been doing it for the last 3 weeks, and I have to tell you that the assumption I had in my mind, or the story or the illusion or the myth I was creating in my own head, was that I'm so complex and life is so complicated and confusing. But since I've started journaling and writing things down, one of my journal posts was that I'm not as complicated as I thought. And it's like, as you start to untangle thoughts and untangle who you are, you realize it's not that complicated. Which I just think is really interesting. No connection to what we're talking about, but I just found that kind of really interesting, that as complex as it is, as we start to use one of the human inventions of writing and communication and words, as you start to put it down to paper, it untangles the tangled, and it makes the complex simple.
I think the thing I love about journaling the most, it just allows you to laugh at yourself and what we think. Because I don't know if you found the same, but I've even looked back over entries over the last few years. It's so funny. Like, sometimes there's a paragraph just there around, what do I feel like eating today? Oh, wow. A bird just flew past. Like, depends. It's mind-blowing to know how simple sometimes our thoughts can be, but then also sometimes how complicated they can feel. But then when you write to yourself or put it down on paper, there's something very powerful about that. And for anyone out there that is listening that maybe hasn't tried journaling, just try it for a week or two and see what you come up with. I think at the very least, you'll find out a few things about yourself that you didn't know before when you actually do write it down on paper.
I'd encourage people to look up a bullet journal. That was the system I got started on, and it's bloody fantastic.
Yep. Yeah.
Look,
there's
one
a
of the
couple
other
different
things,
approaches, since we're talking about this, and this is a bit more on the practical side, then we'll go back to talking about our species, there's the bullet journal method. There's one, I think, by Ryan Holiday, which is the Daily Stoic. There's, the one that I really like is just, it's out of the book The Artist's Way, and it's just like freehand consciousness type of journaling where you just write whatever comes to your mind for 2 or 3 pages. You can do gratitude journaling. So even for anyone that's going to embark on the journaling process, there's maybe 4 or 5 really popular methods there that you can play around with. But I think at the end of the day, it's more just around giving yourself 10 or 20 minutes. As to me, I always start with the sentence, emptying my cup. That's sort of like my prompt for journaling. And I just want to get everything that's running through my head out on paper. You can just keep it simple. Vin, are you there or have we lost you?
Hi, everyone. We just want to welcome you back. Sorry about the disruption. My internet fell apart on the day. It was stormy and it didn't come back. So this is 3 days later, Ali and I.
Remember that? And then the modem would start going
Oh, my God.
You'd be downloading an image, which would take 15 minutes, and then somebody would call, cancel your connection. And
oh gosh, and let's be realistic for a moment. When you're teenagers using the internet, we were using it for very inappropriate content.
Yeah, you can use your imagination to know what image that I was downloading as a
puppies and little kittens, and you know,
it was educational for sure.
Very educational. No, but look, what we were talking about last was we were talking about the importance. You were talking about, or should I say, rambling about the importance of journaling.
Yeah, I was rambling, especially once you left and I didn't realize that you were gone.
I won't edit that in because it just got really sad. Yeah,
where are you? And then you sent me a message just saying, just continue on. Your internet was gone for about 45 minutes. So imagine if I was just freestyling on journaling for that entire time. It would have been
it'd be a bloody awful podcast.
Horrible.
And it's like you're still complaining about why I've left. You're like, why did you leave me? Yeah. Why did you leave me?
Yeah. Oh, well, we're back.
So wrap up your thought, because I was saying that I have been journaling now for about 3 weeks and it's been unreal. It's been unbelievable. And I think the thought you left it on was just how you love it because you use it as a brain dump.
Yep. Yeah, I think, look, that probably was the end of my thought. It's just a way to release, to connect with yourself, to see where you're at, and highly recommend it.
Okay, so I remember what I was going to say because I wrote it down as well. And what I wanted to link it to was the fact that with Homo sapiens, with us as a race, the cool thing about us is that we don't have to wait millions of years. Yeah, as a species, sorry. We don't have to wait millions of years for natural selection to happen for us to change a behavior. So, animals have to take millions of years before one group of animals accidentally does a new behavior, and then that new behavior is, what do you call it? That new behavior is then adopted because it's more favorable, right? Mm-hmm. As human beings, all we have to do is change your belief. And once we change your belief, it changes our behaviors. And that's a really cool thing, because I talk about this in the example of journaling, because I've always had the idea that journaling is like, dear diary, today I'm going to talk about Monica, the girl I have a crush on at school. And I just thought that journaling was always that. So to me, because of my belief that it's that, I never did it. But then after you told me multiple times about the importance of journaling, it changed my belief about journaling, and then immediately changed my behavior, and I started journaling. And then I've gained significant improvements in my life because I journal. And I thought that is such a powerful thing that humans can do, in that we can just, if we learn how to change our beliefs, it can immediately change our behaviors. That is an advantage over other animals. That is just so significant.
It's pretty.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Even when you were saying that, I was thinking about that, is how powerful it is when we were speaking about storytelling earlier. Like, that's how powerful storytelling is, that it can literally change your actions in your life and how you allocate your time. You're right, because if I told you a really average story about journaling, it potentially could be a behavior that you wouldn't then go out and try.
Yeah.
Like, it took time and repetition, and you have to sell the benefits. It's like with so many different things that we do, like exercise or whatever it is. It's really hard to believe that these things are going to be beneficial for us until somebody helps guide us there.
I now need someone to sell me the story of not overeating, because I love food so much. I need some really scary stories about overeating.
Yeah. Yep.
But that was what I thought was so brilliant, in that, you could be in a situation where you feel like, oh, I don't like where my life is, and, oh, I don't like where I'm at. And if you learn how to change some of your beliefs, and if you go down that rabbit hole, because again, let's just be clear. I mean, this is what I believe anyway. When you think about where your beliefs come from, well, where do they come from? I really believe our beliefs are formed by the people around us. Whatever the people around us believe to be true, we believe to be true. Whatever they believe we can do, we believe we can do. Whatever they believe we can't do, we tend to believe we can't do. So make sure you find people who have the beliefs you want. You know, it's not just about finding people you like to hang around or that are fun to hang around with. I think at a deeper level, it's important to find people who believe in the things you want to believe in.
Yeah.
I think that's such a...
Like the external environment, the information that you consume, the shows that you watch, the books that you read, all of these inputs, I think, then form our beliefs. And I think it happens at a very subtle and subconscious level as well. Like the shops that you go to, the place that you live,
the country you live in.
Yeah, the country you live in, and then that forms like our culture, our norms, our beliefs. But I think the really cool thing that you just touched on then is that we're in control, and it's a lot of the times it's up to us to then decide which belief system we want to then choose, which stories we want to tell ourselves. And I think that's a really tricky thing.
Because it's not only the stories that... It's not only the stories that other people tell you, it's the stories you tell yourself.
Yeah. And just every, call it, event can be viewed from so many different perspectives and lenses. Like if you look at, right now we're in Melbourne, we're in lockdown number 5. And
far out.
It's amazing. Like you can see there's a perspective of anger. There's a perspective of how's this happening again? Then there's a perspective of, oh, awesome, I'll get to chill out at home with my kids again, or I'll get to go on those walks that I stopped doing. So it all just depends which story that you then want to tell yourself. And I think that's something that is super powerful when you can start, using that in a way that then serves you.
How do you think people can form new beliefs if they've got bad beliefs? I mean, the one I brought up was look for people that have the beliefs you want. Do you think there are any other ways for people to be able to... I mean, what ways do you know of? If you have a negative belief about life and what you do, what would you do to try to change that belief?
One that I like is just looking at the complete polar opposite of that belief. So say if I remember doing this at university when we'd do things like, all right, what's the difference between someone who's a left wing or a right wing person? And then you start having a look that they can look at the same topic and you can then view them from 2 completely different perspectives. I think acquiring a more rounded picture of whatever it is, if you have a strong held belief, is how you can then start opening up to changing it and not being too attached or connected to that belief.
And to bring in the power of journaling again, I think you could use journaling to be able to change some beliefs. So say you got some negative beliefs about yourself and you believe that you can't, or you're not good at exercising, or you can't run, or you're bad at running. You can start to collect evidence in your journal that you are good at running. You know, it's one of the things that I know a lot of, like my cousins who are psychologists, they always say to me, it's all about collecting evidence. If you want to form new beliefs, it's about collecting new evidence that supports that new belief that you want. And then also collecting evidence to show that that negative belief is not real. You know, I think a lot of people, it's very easy for people to say in general, oh, I'm not good at anything. But that's not true. You know, I don't have any passions. But it's like, yeah, but that's, again, not true. Start collecting. Hey, I was kind of excited about painting rocks the other day. Like I genuinely was painting rocks the other day and got excited over it. So it's like I journaled about that. It was something... That was... You say that with a little bit of sarcasm there, mate. But seriously, right, I was painting it. And I just... The moment I write these things down, I'm collecting little pieces of evidence that suggest and that is evidence to me that, hey, you do have some other interests. You know, you're not only interested in magic or in speaking or in communication. There are other facets to you as a human being.
For sure. And I think that's a really cool prompt as well, what you just mentioned before. When you find yourself saying sentences like, I don't think I can do that, or that's not for me. It's worth just exploring it, even if you don't change anything in relation to that. Writing it down, because who knows, maybe in 5 years' time you'll change it. Like at the moment, gardening isn't something that I love doing. I have a belief that I'm not really into gardening, or it's not something that excites me. But that doesn't mean that in 5 years' time I won't love gardening. I think that's also a really big limitation when we hold those beliefs very strongly. Another interesting one that I was just thinking about then is when you look at cryptocurrency at the moment. Like, that's something that now people are believing in or not believing in. Some people think that it's a complete bubble and a scam, and it's Bitcoin's worth nothing. And then other people are like, Bitcoin's going to be the next form of currency. So I love these things where there's polarizing beliefs, even though it's one topic. It's really cool to see both sides of it.
Well, cryptocurrency is a part of the intellectual revolution, right? I mean, the creation of money was the intellectual revolution, and it freaks me out that money doesn't exist except in our minds. And because the majority of people around the world believe that this note has value, therefore it has value. Yep. That really freaks me out, because it's like something that I spent the majority of all of my 20s trying to pursue, was to make more money and to have more money. And I was trying to make something that isn't real. Like, it's real only because...
that's an interesting word, isn't it?
Like, is it
real or is it not real? Yeah.
Well, whatever we believe is real is real.
Yeah. That Powerful.
Whether it is or just complete stupidity, what I just said, I don't know.
And that was the line on his tombstone.
Oh, what is real, Vinh. Died shortly after he believed he could fly.
But you're right. Man. Because even, and the book highlights that, it tells us that money isn't that real. But what is real is the trust and the belief that we have in it that then creates value. So it's funny. Because even nowadays, when you look at, I think, the Treasury and all the banks, back in the day, if you had to have $1 for every dollar that was in your bank. Whereas nowadays, you might have 10%, 10 cents to every dollar. Or in some cases, 1 cent to every dollar, depending on which country that you're in. Which is phenomenal. And I think the book uses an example that $1 can be used by like 4 different people, even though it's not tangibly held by any single person. Because if I take a loan for $10,000 and then the bank's earning interest on it, and then they're lending out some of that money to somebody else who then goes and starts a business or buys a car, there's so many ways that you can utilize that one single unit.
I know, that's so crazy. That part of the book blew my mind as well.
Yeah, it's phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
well, it makes me think of this. There was a Darren Brown show, and I think it was called Hero at 30,000 Feet. Have you seen that?
Not that one. I've seen a fair few of his other ones. Not that one.
All right. So the basis of the show is, spoiler alert, basically he takes a guy that hasn't done much with his life, kind of like a dropkick, and he takes this guy. He was on a plane, and then Darren Brown hypnotized him while he was on an actual plane. Then while being hypnotized, he takes him off the real plane into a fake plane, and sitting next to all the same people. They're all actors, of course, and then now they're in a simulated plane, like it's a simulation, and they're all sitting in this plane that pilots use to learn how to fly. And then they simulated a plane crash. And then they basically said, we need someone to help us land the plane. The pilots have passed out. And then no one else volunteered. And they kept building up this situation and having the passengers next to him. Like, wait, can you do something? Can you help us? And gradually they do it in a way where he does actually go into the cockpit and he lands the plane, which is not a real plane. It's a fake plane. And the moment he lands the plane and saves everyone, Darren Brown hypnotizes him again, places him back on a real plane. I think that's the situation. And then have him wake up. And then he went out of the plane as if he saved 300 people. And because he believed in that story, he changed the way he lived significantly. So after that, he was no longer a dropkick. He believed in himself, and he had this newfound sense of identity, and he started to live this completely different life and got promotions, got into a new job, changed the way he lived his life, and it was amazing. And in the end, Darren Brown revealed to him that none of this was real. And that was one of the episodes that Darren Brown got a lot of slack about, because people said that, like, that's psychologically damaging to that person.
Yeah.
And the person said that it wasn't damaging. The person said, no, it was a great experience. And I say this because it highlights the importance of, again, the stories that you believe. And whether it's money, the story you believe, the story about money, whether it's real or not. And imagine that if enough people believe something great about you, and if you believe something great about you, then you're going to do great things. Doesn't that show the importance of, parenting, community, family, friendship circles? I wonder, what do the people around us believe is possible for us? And how limiting that can be, how freeing that can be, or how terrible that can be.
Oh, for sure. Well, how easy is it to lose confidence and momentum? I don't know if you find this, but to me, it always feels that when the ball's rolling and you're up and about and you're confident, you're having a few wins, like obviously not a level of win like saving 300 people on a plane, but you're just getting that consistent feedback loop of every action that I take is leading to something positive. It just keeps compounding for a lot of the time. But then when that stops, it can also go the other way, where it feels like, I just stubbed my toe, then I tripped over, then my car got scratched. Like, it can go, I don't know if you find that, but there's going to be something there with how fragile that narrative can be, both at a conscious and subconscious level. And how do we then control it?
Yeah.
How do we then turn that into something practical? Like, what do you then do? Like, I know we all get into ruts and we lose our momentum a little bit, or we start feeling a little bit of doubt or whatever that may be. Do you get that? Or are you just always saving planes and landing planes?
I just have no idea what you're talking about. I don't relate to any of that. I'm just always feeling great.
That's how you keep
for
it at
sure.
a high level.
Yeah,
you have to keep it at a high level with that mindset.
Yeah, I just zoned out while you're talking because I'm like, I don't relate to any of this nonsense. I am amazing. No, of course I do, dude. I mean, the way for me is I just have to be so conscious of taking advantage of what is called a pattern break. So whatever pattern that I find myself in, if I'm starting to feel negative, it's generally a cycle of thought. It's a pattern of actions that I'm taking. It's a pattern of thoughts that I've been having. And I just have to have a very severe or significant pattern break, meaning I'll even change the room that I'm in. I'll change the music that I'm listening to. I'll move my furniture around in my office. I will change the clothes that I'm wearing. It's to me, when I have significant pattern breaks, I'm able to snap myself out of the rut. And depending on how big the rut is, I will adjust my level of action to coordinate that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, if you know me, and you do know me, but Pei Wen, my wife, she knows me very well, and she has seen me move my office around. I do it once or twice a year, and the reason I do it, for me, it's to signify, oh, this is a change. I'm breaking out of an old pattern or an old sequence of habits. It kind of signifies this is the turning of a new leaf.
I really like that. It's funny when you were talking about even clothes, like uniform, how much of a difference that makes. I don't know, because we've been working from home and been in this sort of semi-lockdown environment for so long, I pretty much only wear track pants. And I think that seems to be a common trait for a lot of people that I speak to, is that even when you go to the shops nowadays, you don't see many people dressed up anymore. It's like a t-shirt, track pants, and a hoodie has become Australia's national uniform. And I'm not sure if this is global or not, but
I think it is global.
The other day, I went out there and I wore chinos, like really dressed up to the nines.
Ooh, look at you!
It was put some shoes that weren't just runners on. And it was amazing. Like I just started walking a little bit differently. The posture was a little bit straighter. And I was like, wow. So I think you're onto something there with pattern breaking and changing things up a little bit. And maybe this is really relevant to right now as well, is do something that just is completely different or change it up a little bit, change your room up. I really like it. I mean, it's cool.
There was a great YouTube video I watched where I can't remember where it was from, but it was a video where it talked about even if you are locked down in your house, create different spaces and don't let the different spaces contaminate. And what they meant is have a space where you work, have a place where you eat, have a place where you sleep, have a place where you recreation, watch TV and enjoy yourself, have a place where you exercise. And they literally said, get a piece of tape, even if you live in a small apartment, and tape up different places in your house. And in this space, you only exercise. Once you're done, get out of that space. Next, if you eat there, just eat there, then get out of that space. And if you're watching TV here and just relaxing, that's all you do. Don't bring your laptop. Don't work here. Don't contaminate the spaces. And what it said is you want to visit different spaces. And by you visiting the different spaces, it's like you're turning the turbine that creates momentum and energy and motivation. What happens to people is they contaminate all the spaces. And if you think of all the spaces as different parts of the wheel, if you don't move to the different spaces, the wheel doesn't move, meaning there's no friction created, therefore no motivation. And I love that. And you know, that's why I created this garage for me. Is to me, my garage is my virtual studio. It's where I do my work. It's where I do my deep thinking. But once I'm done, I get out of here. I don't just sit here and do nothing. So to me, it's anchored in my mind that this is a space for work. So even for me, when I'm having a kind of shitty day, I'm able to walk in here and still work because I don't contaminate. Yeah, I don't contaminate this space with feeling crummy. You know, it's cool. You come in here, you do your thing and you work. And then upstairs for me, which you've been to my place as well, is where I exercise and where my gym is and everything. And when I go there, just go there to do the work. And once you're done, get out. Don't use your phone there. Just get out. I thought that was a really cool takeaway from that video.
That's awesome. I really like that. And one of the words that just really stood out there that you said was energy. And I know that was just from reading this, that was one that I highlighted and made a note about. So let's jam on energy for a bit.
I think start us off.
Well, for me personally, I think I've recently found that my energy has been fluctuating. So it's like high and low a lot more than being stable, if that makes sense. So, and it's probably just, again, the nature of the times at the moment, but there'll be days where there's just 3-4 hours of chilling, like watching Netflix, building Lego, just lounging around the house. Whereas previously, you know, you'd be out, you'd be going traveling or playing golf or going to meetings face to face, and it starts generating more energy. So what I'm getting to is, again, how do you manage energy? And one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is nearly like having a strategy for energy, because I always think about things that I like managing. So say years ago, it started off with you manage your money, or that was a resource. Then you manage time. But the one that I'm now really looking at is energy as a key resource. And yeah, I don't really know where I'm going with this, but I want to freestyle on it.
No, that's good. This is good. I've been journaling about this a little bit too. And the point I want to bring up, I love this concept of managing energy like you manage your wealth and your finances. You know, that's a really cool concept. And again, I'm not very knowledgeable on this topic, but I know that my energy is very closely linked to my nutrition. Because if I eat a really heavy meal, my energy is sapped. It doesn't matter how good my headspace is. If I just had, 5 pieces of bread with butter all over it and, really lots of meat in it, I'll feel sick. And my energy is very closely correlated to my nutrition. And I'm assuming all human beings are the same.
Yeah. Makes a difference.
And I literally wrote in my journal last week, there were a few days where I had some heavy meals because we went out to restaurants with a few friends. And I felt terrible. Up until the next day, I woke up, I still felt terrible. And I just wrote that you got to get a handle on this, man. And I wanted to start logging how I felt after meals. And that was a really eye-opening experience because, we all eat and then we get to that point where we know we should stop eating. But then because the food is so yummy and because there's so much variety, we don't stop, we keep going, and then we feel sick at the end of it, right? That is a common occurrence for me. So I know it's very closely linked to that.
And that's
one part of it
really
is.
Cool And the reason why I wanted to chat to you about this too is because I think just consistently, you're probably one of the most energetic people that I know. And I'm sure you get it all the time, but you're always pretty on, and I remember even when I first met you, I was like, oh yeah, he's doing a communication course now, but surely he's not at this energy level all the time. And then after knowing you for 5 years, it's like, oh yeah, wow, he's actually pretty close to that energy level all the time.
I think it's broken.
Yeah, I think he's broken, or like his batteries just don't run out, or where's the plug? What wall outlet is he charged into? But I think that it's something that it's really powerful. And I know you actually teach this. You teach this in communication, but I wonder if you've also thought about how you break that down and how you sustain that level of energy. Like even the other day, we've been coaching soccer lately, and one of the dads that we're coaching with, he's got a similar type of energy that you have. It's just always enthusiastic. It's always up and about. Like he's bouncing off the walls, and it's infectious. People gravitate to people like that. Well, I do personally. I love people that have that high energy because I'm relatively chilled a lot of the time. So I think it fires me up a little bit. But that's just something that me being that person that's probably more at a lower cadence, call it, teach us. How do you then, like, I know you mentioned nutrition there, but
yeah, I think there's a few other things
tips
too.
and tactics? Yeah.
Well, I just want to quickly mention too is that, but I'm also drawn to your kind of chilledness as well. I like that. So it's funny. Hey, we're kind of drawn to the things that we are not. That's pretty interesting. I mean, I think there are many reasons we can jam on it. I love to get your insights on it too. But to me, another one would be just your mindset around energy. And just like how you think about managing energy, this is not about managing energy, but this is about how you spend your energy. And my whole philosophy on this when I teach my students is, well, when we think about generosity, there are two main forms we tend to think about generosity in. And the first one is money. The first one people tend to think is, oh, that person's very generous. Oh, very generous with their money. And then when we think about it a little more, we go, oh, no, but generosity can also be about time. Oh, I really appreciate this person's time. They're so generous with their time. But we rarely think about generosity in the form of energy. And to me, what that soccer dad is doing every time he's speaking to people and spending time with people is he's being generous with his energy as well as his time and maybe money, right? So to me, when you start to view energy as a form of generosity, it changes the way you spend your energy around people. I find that there are some people who conserve energy because they don't think about it as a form of generosity. Oh, I'm just keeping that to myself. Well, to me, the moment you start thinking about energy as a form of generosity, you give more of it. And especially if generosity is the value of yours, right? Because I could be generous with my energy, and then therefore you feel better. You will feel better after having an interaction with me. And then this comes down to simple interactions, like when you go and get a coffee at the cafe. You can say thank you in a generous way. You can add a few words and go, hey, thank you for always doing this amazing coffee art. I always feel terrible drinking it, so thank you for that. And just by adding a little bit of extra communication and energy, you make that person's day. Or you could just say thanks and then leave.
It's true. And even traveling around with you, it's true. Like it nearly keeps compounding. Like I'll see when you speak to the person at the hotel desk or you speak to the person at the cafe, and you consistently do light them up, and then it leads to some sort of interaction. There's usually something that happens. It's like, oh, here's a free cookie, or we'll give you the table near the window, or we've upgraded your room. Like I've seen you do it countless times. So there's something in this that I think there's something really powerful in this topic, and it's actually one that we haven't really spoken about too much throughout the podcast, because what I hear you saying there, it's a bit like the abundance mindset. But when most people think about the abundance mindset, they're like, oh, think that you want the big bank balance and then visualize it and all that. But realistically, there's actually probably a lot of power and energy. But because energy is hidden, it's actually more hidden than money, and even time,
It's unseen.
I don't think we view energy as a resource.
Yeah, I don't think we do.
Or we manage it.
Such an interesting topic.
It is a really interesting topic because you're right. Like you can sit there and the funny thing about conserving energy, which is really interesting, is that you can't really bank it. I don't think. Like if I sit there and do nothing for 3 weeks and conserve all of that energy, that doesn't mean that in 3 weeks
it doesn't roll over.
Big ball. Yeah, it doesn't compound or roll over. You kind of need to spend it.
Mm-hmm. And it resets every night if you have good sleep. If you have a good 8 hours of sleep every night, it's like you're like a phone. You've got 100% of battery. And look, here's the reality of it. I was
thinking of a Tamagotchi. Do you remember those toys?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Just going to keep the levels up.
No, but I mean, I really do think of it like a battery. And the reality of the situation too is if I have a day where I'm just expending a lot of energy and giving a lot of my energy, I'll be flat by 4 p.m. You know, and the rest of that day, it's okay. I give myself permission to recharge, you know, do things that help you recharge. Whereas I used to be in a position where I'd expect myself to be at 100% battery all day. And that was unrealistic as well, because I, like you and everybody else, we get tired. And that's where the other elements of energy come in. You know, one, generosity is around the mindset. You know, you got to have that philosophy and that mindset of being generous with your energy. The other one I spoke about is nutrition. I mean, the other obvious one is sleep, right? I never valued sleep like I value sleep right now in my life. After reading books about sleep and then listening to podcasts about sleep, well, not only do I value it because I've read things about it and have heard stories about it, since I've been journaling, the nights where I get 8-9 hours of sleep, I wake up without the alarm and I feel like $1,000,000. And then that means the rest of that day, I have so much goodness to give my world. I have so much energy, surplus. I'm just, energy for you. You get energy. You get energy. Everyone gets energy. And
Oprah with energy.
Yeah, yeah. But it's great then, because before I used to force it, and forced energy doesn't create goodness like this natural overabundance of flow of energy. You know, there's a difference there.
So that's interesting. Is there a difference between faking it till you make it? So say, for example, if you are tired and you just, do you have to then consciously put it on, or is it just second nature?
No, when I force it, I don't feel great while I'm doing it. When I have an abundance of it, I feel great when I'm doing it. So there's a huge difference. When it's forced, I don't feel good, but the other person feels good still.
Yeah.
However, when it's like, I've got good sleep, I've got good food, nutrition in me, my headspace is good, then, man, I feel great while I'm doing it. And I know on the other end, they're feeling great receiving it too.
That's pretty cool. And that's probably similar to money and time as well. Like if you spend money and you don't feel good about it on something that you're not really aligned with, it's going to feel a little bit dirty. If you have to go to a meeting or an appointment that you really don't want to go to, it's not really aligned. So I like that concept. So it's important then to design conditions that make your energy pure, call it, or aligned with you. That might be sleep. It might be nutrition.
And this is the thing as well. If you, again, let's just use the phone analogy because it's simple to understand, right?
Yep.
If you charged overnight and you only got 23% battery, you're less likely to let other people use your phone because you're like, I've only got 23% battery. It's going to last me the whole day. You know, hey man, can I borrow your phone real quick? I want to watch a real quick YouTube video. You're like, yeah, but just be quick, man. And then you're like, you're all stingy about it, right? Whereas if you've got if you've got a battery pack because you did 9 hours of sleep and you got good nutrition, now you've got like a, massive battery pack behind you. Hey, anybody could use my phone today. Anyone want to use it? Anyone want to play a game on it? Hey, anyone can come in. It's a free charge. Yeah. But let's look at some people in the world who are like that. You look at The Rock, right? You check him out on Instagram, always giving people energy, good vibes. Look at another is Kevin Hart. If you follow him on Instagram, always good vibes every day, good vibes. But it's because they know how to take care of their battery and recharge, and they're next level. They got battery packs, man. They're next level.
It's pretty cool. I remember, but you've got to understand. Back in the day, used to say volume was such a big key to energy. too. When
It
you're
is.
speaking. And I remember doing that at times where if I was feeling a little bit meh, you just sit there and just driving in the car, just start talking really loudly, and you start feeling pretty buzzed.
Because it's the vibrations.
It's strange.
It's physics.
Somebody was listening.
It's physics.
Yeah.
It's physics. The stronger vibrations when they come through you. I mean, and this sounds weird, but when you use a stronger volume, you literally can use the sound waves of your volume to vibrate other people. They feel it. That's why some people say, I can feel what you're saying. I really connect with what you're saying. It's not only the melody that lives in your voice while you're saying it, it's genuinely the sound waves that people can feel. Whereas if you have such low levels of volume, people can't feel your presence genuinely, biologically, physically. They can't feel it.
There you go.
And I mean, I want to jam a little bit more on energy because there's more to it. I mean, you've got the sleep, you've got the nutrition, you've got the kind of philosophy and way you think about it. You've got what else do you think relates to having more energy? How else can you manage your energy?
I think thoughts and how you process emotions, probably a pretty big one. Like I personally
talk about it.
If I'm in a average mental loop, it's pretty hard to get energized. And you spoke about it earlier about pattern breaking. That's a pretty big one. Because it's really easy if your internal story is, oh, I can't be bothered getting up today. What Netflix show am I going to watch? Like when you got that, we all have it, that type of vibe. It's pretty hard to get energized from that position. But then you have to have some sort of trigger to get out of it, right?
Well, that's right. I mean, that's why the pattern breaks, I think, are really handy.
The pattern break, even the stories. Again, we go back to journaling. It's such a cool exercise when you are feeling that meh feeling, is writing it down, seeing what are those 2 or 3 things, like what stories am I telling myself that's making me feel a little bit low right now, and how can I then just either be aware of that story, accept it, and then change it. What's a story that's going to get me perked up a little bit? Well, it might be as simple as doing 10 jumping jacks or having a nap, eating a nice meal, singing a song at a high volume. Like, these
it's true. It'll make you feel better. Yeah.
They're cool little practical tips, right? They're little hacks that can put you in
I'll tell you right now,
higher energy.
If you don't feel really good, turn on, just go to Spotify and search up Bossa Nova. Look up the Bossa Nova playlist, and far out. I'm not even kidding. I journaled about this a couple of weeks ago where like I did this little experiment on Peiwen and my son, and with Xander. So every morning there were mornings where I would play the Bossa Nova playlist, and there were mornings where I don't. And I just watched their moods on those days. And every morning that I play the Bossa Nova playlist, or just kind of happy music, during the 70s, there's some great, really happy music. And I play it. And my wife started to notice what I was doing. She was like, oh, why are you always playing this music in the morning? And she'll always complain about it a little bit because I turn it up pretty loud. And inevitably, within 10 minutes, she's singing it. Inevitably. And she's moving around, a little more groovy, a little bit happier. Xander's happier. And that is such an important thing to do, is understand there are these little hacks that you can actually just build into the routine of your day that lift your mood. And music moves us. Again, physically, it moves us. You hear it and you just can't help it, but you feel better. It's why in movies, when there's a sad, tragic moment, they pay these musicians like Hans Zimmer, they pay them millions of dollars to create these tracks to make you feel awful, or to make you feel scared, or to make you feel excited, or to make you feel inspired. Music is another big hack.
I love that. Music.
I'm going to throw in another one and say purpose. I think when you feel like you've got or when you have a purpose, it helps you with energy as well. You feel more, I don't know, you feel more energized when you feel you're on purpose. That's
true. It's like an internal, always when I hear the word purpose, I always think it's like a North Star or a GPS. I always picture that.
You have a location. You have somewhere you want to go.
You have somewhere that you're going. It looks after something at a very core level It's like it nearly gives you that 20% or 30% of battery life without
it taps into the reserve. It taps into the reserve, man. That's what it is. It's the reserve that you can only access when you have purpose.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you've got this extra battery, but you can't tap into that energy source unless you've got a good purpose.
For sure. I also think that, you know, when you were talking about when you're doing 15, 16-hour days, I think purpose is sometimes the thing that can drive you, even when you are really depleted.
Yeah. Well, it's that reserve energy tank that you can only tap into when you're doing purpose-driven tasks.
That's very true.
It's why.
Sorry, man.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
No, I was just going to say that, like, I feel like you're not giving that reserve tank of mine enough love right now, and I feel underappreciated. No, but I'm serious. Well, I genuinely mean that. I just right now I think it's such a brilliant idea. I think it's that the reason why some entrepreneurs can go those 16 hours a day and only have very little sleep, it's because they do genuinely tap into a reserve power source that exists.
For sure.
You know, and like, again, I don't think it's one that you want to tap into on a daily basis, because it will run you thin. But yeah,
it's a good call.
I'm amazing, damn it.
Came to mind. You are amazing, phenomenal. Where's claps?
Thank you.
The clapping.
I was just no, I don't. But I just wanted you to say that. Thanks.
Yeah, just get your energy up. You were getting a bit flat there.
Yeah, I was.
You hadn't had a compliment for at least 15 minutes.
If I don't get compliments with every 7.5 minutes, I just go flat, man. Come on, you know this.
It's like pats, like dogs, you know, Labradors just need the
scratch on the belly.
Need the belly scratch. No, but this is good stuff. The other one that I was thinking was nature, being outdoors, walking.
Mm-hmm. So that's it.
That's one. That's one.
Oh, dude, that's a huge one. That's a huge one.
Just nature. The whole of nature, just as one sentence. That's it.
No, but that's amazing, because since I started doing archery, I've been out way more. And I've, you know, I told you on the weekend, like, it's just on the weekends, on Sundays, I normally go out to this valley where I feel like I'm in a forest, and it's so healing, smelling that fresh air, seeing all that greenery, and just being out in the dead still of the morning and seeing the fog. Oh, there's something so healing about that.
No, beautiful. That's the same
I'll
for
throw
me
it
with
in
golf. It's like it's the
Yeah.
same thing. You spend, and I think it's spending a decent amount of time out there as well. Like, yeah, a good
Hours.
10-minute walk's great if that's all the time you've got. But if you can schedule in 3, 4, 5 hours in the outdoors, because that's something that I just don't think as a society we do that much of. Like,
Yeah, we don't.
but that's what I love about golf is one of the strangest things that I love about it is that you will go outdoors in conditions that aren't perfect, right? Because we're so in the average day, it's like, oh, well, I'm not going to go for a walk because it's raining. I'm not going to go for a walk where it's windy. But if you've scheduled in a round of golf and it's raining and you've made a commitment to meet up with 3 people, you're going to go out there and you're going to be in the outdoors for 3-4 hours, and it might be rainy, it might be windy, there'll be trees blowing around, but you get to experience nature in a very unique way that I don't think you get to experience it in normal life. So that's another cool thing, is that you get to, get a broader spectrum.
That's so true. I mean, same with archery.
Powerful.
Same with archery. I mean, I've never ever in my whole life owned a Kathmandu jacket, but I went and got one because I wanted the jacket that was going to keep me warm and rainproof. And regardless of weather, there was one weekend where it was bucketing down, and one of my best mates here, we both went archery anyway and just got soaked, but we did it anyway.
That's cool. That's
would have never done that for a 30-minute walk. No way. Would have just stayed in.
Very cool. Another one that I just had then. Wait,
yep.
You go or me? I'll go.
You go, and then I'll do one last one, and we'll move on.
We're probably going to say the same one. For me, breathing, like Wim Hof method or just deep breathing, I think that's a pretty big one.
That is a very good one. If you're not onto it, that when I get up at 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. and do my virtual keynotes for my clients in the US, I am doing 2 to 3 cycles of that. And it gets me buzzed. And I've tried just Wim Hof, no coffee, and just Wim Hof at 2 or 3 in the morning. Works a treat.
Awesome. And again,
but again,
as you're saying, it's physics, right? Because you're getting energy, you're getting oxygen inside your body, you're releasing carbon dioxide. These things are
Notice
all,
that as well, is that the underlying of that breathing technique, it's also a pattern break. It's breaking the pattern of your current breathing habits. Normally we're breathing very shallow, and especially when you feel down, your breathing's terrible, your posture's terrible. Whereas the moment you engage in the Wim Hof breathing technique, your posture's changed and you're getting more oxygen, you're breathing deeper, and it's a pattern break.
for sure.
Last one I was going to mention was something we have talked about to the point of making people want to vomit and die, but play. Find opportunities to play, and it makes you feel better. It's a little 10% boost in your energy levels when you play. I think it's a very powerful thing that as adults we've forgotten how to do. And then that's why I did the playing. Like I was painting rocks with my son the other night, and I next day I woke up early in the morning. I painted by myself because I was so into it. I was like, this is really fun. Oh my God. So I painted a rock about camping, and I was like, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah,
and
cool.
Play.
Yeah, you were very proud of that rock. You sent it straight away.
Dude, I sent you a photo. Yeah, right? I didn't just send it to you. I sent it to like 6 other people, including my mum.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, Xander's done a really good painting there. You're like, oh no,
dude,
it's mine.
That was mine. Xander would not be able to do that at 4, okay?
Don't sell him short.
Yeah, well, I just realized as I was saying that I was being a negative nincompoop.
No, negative nincompoop.
But really, I'll always be better than him at painting rocks. Look, I think we stumbled upon a really cool topic. I mean,
really cool topic.
I think as human beings,
I feel more energized even just talking about it.
Well, I mean, think about this: animals and the other species that are out there in the world, they're not conscious of being able to change the way they behave so that they can optimize their energy levels. The fact that we can as Homo sapiens, that is so cool. The fact that we can be introspective and look and reflect upon life. And again, that's why journaling is so powerful, because look at how you're living. If you don't like the outcome, you can journal to be more self-aware, and then change the beliefs you have, change the stories you tell yourself, and improve the amount of energy, improve the actions you take, and change your life. It sounds easier than it is, but it's just, at least we don't have to wait 7 million years to develop an extra limb, right? It's just, no, you could create new habits, new behaviors that can change your life tomorrow, today.
That's amazing. And even all those things that we just spoke about then, it would take 5-10 minutes to try most of those in some way, shape, or form, and it could just completely change your day and how you approach it. And I think one big one that we probably left out was people.
Connection. Yes, of course.
Connection, right? Like if you're hanging around with people that have a relatively low energy, it's probably going to be a low energy environment. Whereas if you're in an environment where it's a high energy environment, that's also going to then help you. See, if you've got that friend that's very bubbly, or you need that little spark, go to them.
And sometimes if you need, I just realized how you're abusing this friendship. Yeah, I kind of understand that now.
Just like a leech, just like give me your energy. I'm gonna suck it.
Well, same with you. If I ever want to feel sad and depressed, I call you. Hence why I never call you. There's a burn right there.
That's a good one. This whole podcast is just a humbling exercise for you to see if you can practice different forms of energy.
Well, Ali, the chances are this is all a simulation and you're made up in my head anyway. So
that's true. It was just designed.
I just made you up as a friend. I purchased you on the simulation store as a friend that I wanted to have, and there you are.
You really want it to be a simulation, don't you? I feel like if we found out that it was a simulation, you'd be like, I knew it.
This is the thing. But this is the thing. This is the thing, right? In that money isn't real. The concept of companies and things in life, it's real because we make it real. And if that is the bloody case, it makes what Confucius says so bloody true. It's like, whether you think it's right, whether you think you're right or you're wrong, you're right. Yeah. It's just that even makes it more. It makes it even more likely that it's a simulation, because it's like you've got a PlayStation controller and it's believe this or believe that. What do you want to believe? And whatever you want to believe, therefore dictate an action that will make a certain thing real. So to me, it's whether it is a simulation or not, it's just we have so much power, so much more power than we think. And it's why it makes me think of that quote. Again, terrible source for knowledge because I can't remember where it's from, but there's this beginnings of a quote in a movie where it says, we are powerful beyond belief. And we're afraid of how we're afraid to recognize how powerful we actually are. And reading this book made me think about how powerful we actually are as a species. I mean, no species has advanced like the Homo sapiens species.
It's true.
To think we are the most powerful species on this planet. Just being born into this species, we are so lucky already. That's so crazy.
And I don't know if you've read, like, I'm not a scientist by any means, but read a few books on like physics and, you know, when you watch shows like Cosmos, which is an amazing series, and it's
such a good series.
Mind-blowing, like, to think that, I'd call it the Big Bang or whatever happened 13, 14 billion years ago. Like, we are now just one of the endpoints or a continuation of that event, right? Like, all the particles and atoms and matter and everything that existed from like the stars and the galaxy or whatever it is what makes up our bones and our skin and the air we breathe, the planet that we live on. Like, that blows my mind when you think about that. And it really ties in with, I think, the fact that, yeah, what's real and not real, because, you know, that whole concept of there's not that much difference between me and the chair that I'm sitting on, scientifically. But I get all this consciousness and get to do things and get to think, whereas the chair doesn't get to do that, from what I understand. I don't know if you've got a better chair than I've got.
Yeah, my chair thinks. My chair talks to me.
Like, yeah, I don't want this to get weird. And you're like,
yeah, I don't want you to be alarmed.
Yeah, you're like, what? Your chair doesn't think?
The chair doesn't talk to you?
What sort of weird chair have you got?
What kind of model did you get? Yeah. No, but I hear what you're saying, and it's
really interesting.
And then at the same time, while we say that we are so amazing and we're this brilliant species, what's also interesting is that if the whole human race was wiped, in the context of the entire universe, it doesn't matter.
It's going to keep going. Right.
It's going to keep going, you know, and as we are powerful, we are irrelevant. You know, it's kind of that interesting paradox that it kind of lives in.
It's true. Yeah, the combination of how significant we could be to evolution, like the things that we're doing now and what that might design for the future, but also how insignificant our time on this planet is in the grand scheme of things. Like, it's such a little speck.
You know, another thing that, as I read this book, that I found really interesting was that early Homo sapien civilization, when you look at the earlier versions of us, it's all about it's the physical fight for survival. And as we progress as a species, you notice that towards now where we are, it's all about the mindset and headspace. And I say that because I remember reading a stat from the book where it said that more people die from suicide each year than war and violent crime. So more people die from killing themselves than in war and violent crime. Whereas I think back in the day, more people would have died from war and violent crime. Yeah. Right? Because back then it was all about my tribe taking over your tribe, which kind of shows a shift in that we started being very physical. There was like this physical nature to us. Whereas now we've gotten to the point where, you know, we don't need a farm for our own food. We're less physical. And all of a sudden we live in our heads a lot more. And I think it's why they depicted alien creatures as having massive heads, because it's almost like the ultimate form of us in 20 years, in like 1,000 years or 100 years or whatever it may be to take us to grow heads that big. Yep. It's all just in our heads now. And I think a lot of the times that, you know, I haven't been closely affected by suicide or anything within my circle, so I don't know much about it. You know, it's a horrible thing that happens, but it's to me something that it shows that we're suffering mentally more than ever. More than ever. I mean, how scary is that? That if you ask me, do you think more people die from violent crime and war combined, or suicide? I would have said war and crime for sure.
Yeah. Yep. Well, even a lot of the other
yeah.
diseases that we're dying from, like heart disease and diabetes and all of these, it's not because of a lack of resource or scarcity. Like I think that's what you're kind of saying, right? Is when you look at
Yeah.
the early days, it was about scarcity of resource. Like you had to fight for the berries and the meat, and your tribe had to then protect each other from threats. Whereas we're now looking at the flip side of that, where now that those needs are met, it's so much of it is around meaning and impact and purpose and actualization,
Yeah.
comparison, status. Like it's all these different, there's different things that we're now focused and fixated on because other levels of needs have been met.
I think
And
we're
they come with their
suffering
own
more than
challenges.
ever.
Yeah.
I think the world is better than ever, but we are suffering more than ever.
Yeah.
And
There's a
and it's funny because, go ahead.
just as you're saying that, there's a great book. It's called Factfulness by Rosling, and it just talks about that, like where the world is. It actually goes really well with the book Sapiens, in the fact that you can then see statistically where the world is at the moment and where we've come, but then also how we perceive it. So this researcher, I don't know much about him, but I think it's him and his kids potentially. They do studies based on UN data that shows that, and they ask a survey. It's like a globally run survey that asks 20 or 30 different questions about how people perceive where the world is at today in terms of disease, food, population, equality of rights, whatever it might be. There's a variety of different questions. You can do the survey online as well. But then this book then shows that even now, when I think it's something like when 96% of people just assume that the world is worse today than what it actually is, just because of media and the stories that we're also told that show us these things, because the negative parts of our experience are highlighted so much more strongly than the positive things, right? Like how many news articles do you see saying that, man donates $5,000 to charity? Like that's never, never a story. It's always the other side. So we're fed these things, but the book's really powerful in how it showcases that there's never really been a time like this in our history where even the wars are pretty minimal. The amount of people that die from, what you were saying, from wartime injuries, the amount of people that die from starvation is the lowest it's ever been. The average lifespan is the highest it's ever been, and it's increasing. So there's all these metrics that are showing that it is improving. But then on the flip side, I think the real interesting one is happiness increasing, which is what you're touching on there. Like, are people happier now than what they were 50 years ago?
Well,
who knows?
I wonder that, because I mean, this Sapiens also talks about a bit of Buddhism, and when I found it really interesting that they brought Buddhism up as well, because Buddhism defines suffering as something that comes and arises from craving. We suffer because we want things, and maybe it's because of modern day marketing. The reason we are suffering so much is because marketing has been designed, and marketers have deep psychological understanding, a deep psychological understanding as to how humans work, and they're using all of this research to make us want things we don't need. And as a result of all this craving for houses, cars, clothes, watches, jewelry, things that we don't necessarily need, that suffering is coming from all the craving that the modern day media is infecting us with.
For sure. Yeah, craving, comparison.
They're
programmed. I think it uses an example of, feeling tired? You need chocolate biscuits by X brand or whatever it is, like all these things that we don't even really need. We're told that we do need them. Otherwise, we're deficient. So much of
you're not good enough.
What we're fed is a deficiency mindset. It's like, you haven't posted on Instagram. No one's going to know what you did the last 20 minutes. There's such a fear-based mindset with so many of the things that we do.
Social media has something to do with it for sure. That's
Absolutely.
definitely. I mean, watching the Social Dilemma was such a powerful insight into how we've created this. Basically, it's a drug that anyone can have access to at any time. It's crazy.
Yep.
Well, I mean,
Dopamine
that's
hits,
an interesting. That's an interesting topic to talk about, because I was shocked that this book touched on the topic of happiness. Well, like when it came to happiness towards the end, and the book was talking about happiness, I was like, wait, what? The history of human evolution is now talking about happiness. That's really interesting. I didn't, because it was so factual about, you know, where humans were at what period of history. I didn't think we were going to touch on happiness, but when it did, I was surprised.
Yep.
And I mean, it was talking about how happiness is based on pleasurable feelings. So that means one school of thought is that to increase our happiness is a matter of increasing biochemical releases of certain chemicals. Or happiness can also be based on meaning. And if happiness is based on meaning, then it's a matter of deluding ourselves, because meaning is in itself delusional based on what the author was saying. So the author on one hand was saying, oh, look, if happiness is based just on biochemical release, then maybe it's about just taking drugs and manipulating that biochemical release. Or if it's about meaning, then you've got to understand that it's delusional, because any meaning that you derive from life is only true because you think it's true, and a certain number of people around you think it's true. It's not actually true. It's delusional. And then, like, I was like pleasantly surprised, and then
so the happiest person on earth
depressed.
Should be a delusional drug taker. Like, essentially.
I think that is the summation of that section of the book.
So we just figured out life.
Well, the author had this one part where he wrote, and I noted this, and I just felt it was so depressing to read. And tell me how you feel when you hear this.
Yep.
But what it says is, life has no meaning, and people don't need to create any meaning. They just need to realize there is no meaning, and thus be liberated from suffering caused by our attachments and our identification with with the empty phenomena. I mean, wow.
Yep.
That's slightly depressing and slightly not somehow. I'm not sure.
It's something we've spoken about a little bit. My mind's been on the concept of attachments heaps lately. Yeah, and I think we maybe in one of the previous episodes we spoke about attachments. We spoke about the weights that exist in our life and our external world. And I think there's something here. Like every single book that I've read that's on happiness or mindfulness or spirituality, it always ends up finishing. The summary ends up at 2 points. One is don't be too attached. And when they talk about attached, they mean more like, I think, ego identification. So things that are attached to how you view yourself. Like there is a danger in being too attached to things because it usually drives fear. And then the other side is that happiness, like one of the only sources of really true happiness is love and connection. So it's one of these weird paradoxes that to feel happiness, all of these books, and they don't really contradict each other that much other than those two sides. One is around it's like you need to be detached and attached at the same time, if that makes any sense.
No, it does.
That's why everyone struggles probably to be consistently happy. I don't know.
Well, it's like when you are balancing on a balancing beam, the only way to stay on the beam and balance is to have counter forces on each side, counterweights on each side. You need to sometimes rock to the left and then sometimes rock to the right, but that is the only way to stay on the beam. So meaning you have to be able to hold both of those thoughts in mind, be attached and be detached.
And I think it's about, to me personally, that means that it's about not possessing things, but enjoying them.
That's a good one.
Right. That's the only way that I can kind of make sense of it, is even when I look at the happiness that my kids bring me, there's a fine balance there between being super connected with your kids, but then also not being so over-attached that you end up then being overprotective or enforcing your own will or not letting them have their own freedoms. Like having that balance, I find, is super important. Hard to do. But even when you look at marriage as a construct, for example, so much of that is designed around, it's like this contract that it's about possession, nearly that you and me, we now own each other in life, sickness, health, death, like all of these lines. It's like, wow, that's not that inspiring a story when you really break it down. It's quite scary for a lot of people. It's like, what? I got to sign this contract for like 65 years and there's no real out clause. Like even if you're dying and I'm dying, like that's as a contractual agreement, that's pretty full on. Like you wouldn't do that with your utilities company or anyone else. But it's I don't know where I'm going with this point, but I think it's about, like, even when I look at the best relationships, there's that element of just being happy and enjoying each other's company rather than feeling that there's this obligation just because we signed this deal. And it goes back to that point around attachment. Like so many things in our world is designed around attachment. Like what do they say? It's like, go buy a house. So then you're attached to this house for 20 or 30 years. Go get married, have kids, get a degree, get a career, work in that career for 20 years. So much of the last, say, 50 to 60 years has been designed around that. And I think there's components of that lead to a lot of happiness, but then there's also components of that lead to a lot of misery for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was just such an interesting chapter to read about, in terms of, again, happiness, you can't be too attached, but you can't be too detached too. It's just such a paradox. It's so crazy.
It's a fine line. Yeah.
It really is. I mean, but what it made me think as well, because the author had a very, I don't think it's negative, but it's almost a very scientific view. It felt like it didn't feel like it was an inspiring view on happiness. It felt kind of flat. It was flat and very neutral.
Yeah.
And it's probably because of my lack of understanding of what he's trying to say. Yeah, very pragmatic and cold.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's this line I'll bring up again because I think it's just more clearly stated in this sentence where he says, the scientist who says her life is meaningful because she increases the store of human knowledge, or the soldier who declares that his life is more meaningful because he fights to defend his homeland, or the entrepreneur who finds meaning in building a new company, they are no less delusional than the medieval counterparts who found meaning in reading scriptures, going on crusades, or building new cathedrals. And it made me think of something that P.T. Barnum said in the book The Greatest Showman, where there was this critic that kept criticizing, telling him his circus is all fake, it's all BS, none of it is real. And then at one point, the main star, played by Hugh Jackman, P.T. Barnum, turns around and says, "Hey, the magic may not be real, but the smiles are." Right? So it means that, sure, the meaning that sometimes we're using to derive a good life, maybe some of that meaning pragmatically and scientifically is delusional. However, the joy that we get from that meaning, the life that we end up living, that is real. That is real. It may be we use these stories, whatever they might be, to allow us, we use it almost like a tool to allow us to live a life that is enjoyable. So at the end of it, we go, damn, that was a fun ride. And it was a fun ride because I understood the value of these stories, even if they are in actual fact delusional. It allowed me to have a good ride.
Yeah. And adding on that point, I actually think that there's a beauty in the way that he describes us all, because my underlying message, even with him, is like there's that side where he may miss some of the emotional connection with who we are as a species, but I also love the fact he's like, as a species, we just like, let's try not to bullshit ourselves into like, at the end of the day, because that's for me is the underlying message in this book, is don't take yourself too seriously, collectively and as an individual. And he breaks it down for us scientifically, and he shows us that we're not that far off being animals. We're not that far off our ancestors. We're still very early on in our evolutionary period. We're still figuring out a lot of things. But and also the things that you mentioned before, we do have a lot of power collectively. Like we can, with the press of a couple of buttons, we can all be wiped out, which is something that never existed until 40, 50 years ago.
That's so
But
scary.
then we could also be really peaceful and we can work together. Like I think it's such a beautiful, like poem nearly to society and to our species, saying that this is what you all are. This is what we all are. Now that we know this, what can we do with that information?
He said there was this one line that I read that I didn't really understand, but I think I understand now after we've talked about this book for a bit. And this is almost a thought we can end this episode on too, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I'll read that passage from the book, and it says, and then he said that this little passage that he stated, he goes, "This is meant to be the scariest thing if you truly understand the weight of what I'm saying." And what it says is this: many people think the question we should ask to guide our scientific purpose is, what do we want to become? However, because we seem to be on a path to genetically engineering and programming nearly every facet of our wants and desires and consciousness, the real question we actually should be asking is, what do we want to want? What do we want to want? Not what do we want to become? And that's meant to be the most scariest sentence or the most scariest paragraph. Why do you think he said that?
To me, when I heard you reading that passage, it touches on what we are fundamentally as a species, which is we always move forward towards our collective desires. Right? Like if you look at like why do we want to go to Mars? Why do we go to the moon? Why are we designing AI and robotics and cryptocurrencies and social media and the internet? It's because deep down, all of our actions are fundamentally driven by desires. And then those happen individually, they happen collectively, they happen in movements. So I think when that sentence to me, it means that, well, now that we know all of this, again, what are we going to do with it? And when we get clarity on what we want, the clearer we can get on what we want, maybe the message there is that will result in us designing a world that's most aligned with where we need to get to or where we're heading, whatever that is. What about you?
I thought I knew what that meant, and now I don't feel like I know what it means anymore. Because the more I keep reading that in my head, and after listening to you as well, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense too. But I'm confused. I wonder if it's what do we want to become versus what do we want to want?
Yeah.
Want to want. It's almost like he's saying, be careful of your desires. Because
sure.
we are on the path of, it's almost like you have the power to create your own doom. Because in a way, it's like human beings now, the fact that we can genetically modify things and there's different programs I've heard on podcasts like CRISPR, where you can choose whatever genetic feature you want, and all these crazy things. You can literally design a human being. We are literally playing the role of a god now. And it's almost, when I read this, and this is probably me looking too much into it and it's completely wrong, but I'll say it anyway. But it's almost like what he's saying is, what do you want to want? Meaning you have the power of a god. And be careful of what you want to want.
Yeah.
Because if you do this unconsciously, it will be what destroys us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
I see that
scary
on both. I see that on both sides though. Like I don't think that it's just about the potential destruction, because it's also about our potential evolution too. Right? Like, even though we've had the capability to blow every single human being up on the planet, we haven't used it yet. And there's a counter argument saying that that capability is what also has led to peace and the most sustained period of peace in our time. So I think it's very hard to look at any of these things as binary, you know, from a black and white perspective, because there's such an interconnectedness of every single thing that happens. And that's the other thing that this book really highlighted for me, is just that, I think we spoke about it earlier on in the episode, is just that interconnectedness of how every single thing is related. Right? Like the fact that we eat a burger here means that a cow gets bred in Argentina. Like it's all so interrelated. But I think the big difference in what you were touching on there is that we've just got heaps more control than what we've probably more control than we've ever had. And we've got the technologies to really do some full on stuff.
Well, yeah, and actually,
whereas other people, like the cow can't do that. You know, the chair can't do that. Your plant can't do that. Whereas we're only getting, like our ability to impact things and impact the world around us is only probably increasing right now. And who knows what that endpoint might be.
I think I understand now as well. Well, I think I understand what he's trying to say after hearing you as well, is that the scary thing is, what he's saying is, this all can be whatever you want it to be. You decide. And I think there's a scariness in that, in the sense that when someone says you can do whatever you want, what do you want to do? Like that's a freeing but also scary thing, because it comes with a heavy amount of responsibility. Is that because, you know, for all other species, it's the process of natural selection that decides how that species will evolve, right? Whereas we no longer are a part of that natural selection process. We are in some ways, I'm sure, but we have so much more power as to how we consciously design the future now. You know, the Sapiens book, the next version that's written a million years from now will be fascinating to see what era this is and what revolutions the next 3 major revolutions humans go through. There's this quote that I remember hearing on Joe Rogan's podcast where he says, it's not from Joe Rogan, but it's from someone, the podcast where they don't know where any quote is from. He says, but it was something along the lines of, man, I just quickly Googled it, but I still can't find the person, but it says, man becomes, as it were, the sex organs of the machine world, as the bee of the plant world, enabling, like again, what it's saying there is we are again, to give a glimpse of what my thoughts are, is that we will move into a world where it's artificial intelligence, right? Yeah. We are
we could become the ants or the bees or the cows. Yeah.
Well, no, but again, we are the sex organs, in that we just keep creating ourselves to the point where we get smart enough to create the next civilization, like the next species, which is artificial intelligence, right? It's like the Matrix. They use us as batteries.
It goes back to the simulation theory.
It really does. It really does. But man, what a crazy book. You know, going from reading a bunch of personal development books to now reading a book on the history of human beings was such a nice detour.
For sure. And even for everyone out there listening, like, this is just us two jamming on what our views are on this. You'll probably have different views, different thoughts. I know it's a very popular book. Heaps of people have read it, but hopefully our insight provides, a little bit of difference in some of the opinions, maybe even that you had when reading it. But check it out if you haven't.
Yeah, definitely check out this book. Thanks everyone for joining us for this episode, where it was just a roller coaster of different ideas, but we hope you enjoy the book as much as we did. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Bye.